Hello and welcome to part 12. Yes, you heard it, part 12 of the Refuting Marx's Inconsistency and the TSSI series. Today we've got a pretty full panel. We've just dropped off. Alex has gone into the chat to beat the crap out of anybody who disagrees with us. We have all the way from Sweden, newly married. He's got 6 children on the way. Emmanuel, say hello.
Hello. 6 children. Oh my God. Where did you get her? All right. Yes.
Hello. With 7 different women. Okay, Lexi.
That generous Swedish welfare state. What's up, everybody?
Yes. Pay them to be pregnant. That's the way I like it. Now, we also have finally, after much mic problems, we've got Puya, the mashed up Marxes.
Hey. Hey, Tom. How's it going?
Good. Okay, everybody. So we're within sight of the finishing line. It's lap 22 of the 10,000 meters. We've got chapter
just over the horizon.
That's it. We're chapter 10, and we're going to deal with Andrew taking apart. Can anybody hear the fireworks? Why is there fireworks outside the window?
Little tap.
No.
Okay.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. So we're going to deal with the fundamental Marxian theorem. Now, this is a theorem that was a kind of another theorem by the famous Japanese guy Akishio, I think, which the kind of Raffian school, I suppose we call them, or the simultaneous Marxists, they wanted to be able to prove that labor is the sole determinant, sole cause of surplus value, okay, of profit.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is something that Andrew comes to the conclusion that this is something that absolutely doesn't hold. And this chapter, we're going to go and find out that it doesn't hold. So basically, once we introduce simultaneism, that's valuing our outputs and inputs at the same simultaneously, we're going to run into very large problems with the whole basic foundations of those theories.
Yeah, and another issue here is that they have this idea that a profit surplus is necessarily representing a physical surplus of some kind, which when you think about like what a Raffian is and how they're like a non-marginalist, like kind of physicalist, heterodox, like post-Keynesian school or whatever. Like, the very idea of a Raffian Marxist, you have problems. Like one of the basic points of like Raffianism or whatever is that you don't have to take any particular commodity as being the substance of value. You can work from ratios. So the concept of trying to prove labor value to be the substance of something when you don't need to choose a substance. The very idea of Raffian Marxism, like there's a lot of flaws here. But I guess the one thing I'll say for Akishio and Marishima is that instead of just being like, well, we disproved Marx, but cool, we're just going to keep calling ourselves Marxists, they at least nominally are trying to reconstruct a Marxian intuition under the banner of Marxism. They fail. They don't do it right. If they did this right, then we wouldn't need the classical labor theory of value. We could just use this because it captures all the same intuitions. Unfortunately, Andrew is going to show us why that's not true.
Yeah. That was very good, Lexi. And Tom.
You never say good,
like,
Tom. You never say well done, Tom. It's always well done, Lexi. This is
I know.
5 episodes of this now.
I only
just
get you in private chat, Tom. But what I really like about this chapter is that he sort of teases apart Marx's theory of exploitation from just any theory of exploitation.
Right.
And he gets to the specifics because what he's going to attack here is, as you said, the FMT, or the so-called fundamental Marxian theorem.
Air quotes.
And fundamental Marxian theorem is supposedly this idea that we're in a corn economy. You receive 5 bushels of corn for wages, but hey, you produce 10 bushels of corn, right? So there's a profit there. The capitalist makes a profit of 5 because he only has to pay you 5 bushels of corn, but you produce more, and that's what the capitalist takes and sells on the market, and that's where, you know, surplus value comes from, or profits comes from. So you don't really, and that is a theory of surplus extraction, right? It's a theory of how private property could appropriate the fruits of labor of workers, sell it on the market, and reap a profit. But it's not Marx's theory. It stands to reason that a surplus can only be produced if you produce more than it took to produce those stuff. So if the outputs are bigger than the inputs, that stands to reason. But again, the thing here is, if you have this sort of corn economy and you have corn wages and corn outputs, do you really need a labor theory of value? Do you really need Marx's theory of surplus value? And Kleiman's going to say, no, those things are two very different things. So yeah,
I think Kleiman also says that you know, a physical surplus doesn't necessarily imply that there's exploitation of labor, because if you do away with labor values, I mean, you could say anything made this surplus, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
that's a much better way to put what I was
you know,
trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to provide a mechanism to specifically link the surplus to the exploitation.
And that's the sole cause of the surplus value is
Right.
the exploitation of labor, not a third variable.
Right. Again, we just want to stress that in Marxism, of course, and most people know this, but that, you know, we're not just talking about transhistorical wealth as it's existed throughout all economies. We're talking only about the emergent, you know, attempt to capture this form of wealth in value. It's specific to capitalism. And so it's not all that crazy to say that only labor creates this. It's an historically specific phenomenon. This isn't a transhistorical political economy. This is only about capitalism.
Okay. I've got everybody, we've got the stuff up there to show. I've shared it on the screen. Will we do a bit of reading a bit of quotes here?
Let's get into it.
Let's get into
Go for it.
Let me just read here what Andrew says as an intro. What matters is the fact which remains from Akisho. What matters is the fact which remains absolutely unchanged, that the surplus labor of workers is the unique source of profit, when these terms are defined in the simultaneous dual system manner. This claim, which Akisho and subsequent authors have supposedly proved, was dubbed the fundamental Marxian theorem by Morishima. Okay, so yeah, so like Andrew goes on, he talks about how this is like a really very important core part of the kind of Marxian school of economics. He also goes on here to talk about physicalism. Okay, let's see. Physicalism tries to define surplus labor and profit in this manner. This is the manner that you were talking about just there. Let me see. Maybe we'll okay. Sorry, I'm being kind of incoherent here. Let me get somewhere.
Got to get that orange.
Oh, yeah, I need a goddamn orange. Okay, here we go. Let's just read all this paragraph, really. I think this is kind of important. It'll set us up for what's coming. Okay, the fundamental Marxian theorem serves an enormous ideological function within mainstream Marxian and radical economics. It has continually been claimed that Marx's exploitation theory of profit has been vindicated by one or another interpretation or theory that makes use of the FMT. These interpretations and theories have continually been hailed as embodiments of the very essence of Marx's theory, even though they arrive at his conclusions by somewhat different means. Thus, the FMT and the models from which it follows are also said to demonstrate that Marx's own value theory is superfluous, or worse, the Marxian theory of exploitation can be constructed quite independently of the labor theory of value. Profit depends upon the degree to which workers can be made to produce more output than they and the production process consume. This surplus approach can be developed without reference to Marx's problematic value categories, as in Raffa's work. Okay. Anybody have anything to say about that?
Yeah, well, there you go. It's the idea that what Marx is getting at is that the workers produce more than they're getting in wages, and that's apparently the fundamental Marxian theorem. And if that's what you believe, then that is perfectly true.
Yeah.
But again, like, that is my TLDR of this entire situation is, if you do not accept a difference between use values and value, if you do not accept that physical outputs of physical goods, stuff we need, i.e. use values, is different from value, if you don't think that there's a difference between those two, then go ahead and be a Raffian. If you do think that there is such a way, that there is such a thing as use value and value being different things, then that quote from Monjovi, that profit depends upon the degree to which workers can be made to produce more output than they in the production process consume. That statement is nonsense if you think that physical output and value output are different things. If you think that,
yeah, it's a real shame, actually, that this aspect of, you know, the critique of political economy isn't getting across. Like, when people stress that this is a critique of political economy, what I think the cash value of what they're trying to say is that this is only about capitalism. Don't try to make this a general theory. Marx does have a general theory of exploitation that he draws off of, you know, corvée labor, and Engels especially elaborates this. But value is not that theory. Value is a specific form of exploitation that is specifically spectral, does not, ghostly, you know, it does not correlate with physical output. So much of his work is about the conflict between wealth, which doesn't have a util or a hedon or something you can add up for Marx. It's, you know, there's only different, you know, qualities. There's no abstract unit of wealth there for Marx as there is for Smith and Ricardo. Like, for Marx, that the abstract unit of wealth, that's always going to be value, and that's always going to be something about capitalism. And so these models are trying to basically capture the old school political economy intuition that we're dealing with a process that's greater than capitalism in our models.
Yeah. Plus, like, if that were true, that exploitation happens whenever you have more output than you have input, well, then productivity is exploitation by definition, right? Which would be really problematic. Like, so
doesn't make
it just doesn't make any sense.
Under capitalism, you know, productivity is all about, you know, how much value you can make per output. But, you know, we're just using the terms differently at that point.
Yeah, but like, no, but even I disagree. Even if we use the words to mean exactly the same thing, i.e., producing more output tomorrow than we did today.
Productivity is going to make more output. You mean physical output?
Yeah, physical output. Yeah.
That's the thing. Marxists, when they're talking about productivity in capitalism, it's not talking about physical output.
No, I know, but that's right. My point. But I'm glad you made that distinction more clear to our listeners. Maybe I was getting a bit ahead of myself, but yeah, it's if you're a physicalist and you're saying that you don't need any values, you don't need any prices, all you need is corn. And you can have a corn theory of exploitation whereby workers receive less corn than they produce, then, you know, all productivity and anything that makes our standard of living better is equal to more profit, and it's equal to more stuff, and therefore more exploitation, which is, call it what you will, it has nothing to do with how capitalism works or what Marx is, I think, even remotely interested in.
Yeah. I have a greater problem with, you know, not using money in these things. Like, it kind of takes for granted that money is a veil and that it doesn't have a specific kind of role in the value form as a mediator. But again, they don't really believe in Marx's, you know, theory of surplus value. They don't really think of exchange value as being produced in the same way. So I guess these frustrations are just part and parcel to the school, and we should probably soldier on. But the point being is that the Marxian pedigree right off the bat is fucked.
Okay, Lexi, you're getting a 10-minute penalty there for saying the words value form beside each other.
Hey, value form is in capital. That shit's in capital. There's
okay,
yeah, it is.
Also, who would have known that John Bon Jovi was such a Sraffian? Very surprised to know that. Yeah. Okay, moving on. John Bon Jovi, the famous
John Mangiavi. Yes.
Yes.
I was very impressed. This is only slightly. It's almost as good as living on a prayer.
Yeah. Yes. Oh dear, there's got to be some really bad joke I could come up with. Damn it, too slow. Okay.
You gotta get top that orange right now.
Damn it, I'm usually like rapid fire. Okay. Yeah, okay, let's try and read a bit of this here. This is Andrew going to get into it. Thanks for that 10 minutes cut that I'll do for the editing there. Okay, so Andrew goes on to state, yet if the theorem stated above, the surplus labor of workers is the unique source of profit, when surplus labor and profit are defined in a simultaneous dual system manner, is false, then this line of argument collapses. I wish to show that this theorem is indeed false. So basically, he's going to find some situation where, you know, you have a surplus of, surplus labor and negative profit, or even profit with no surplus labor. We're going to find some weird ass situations that fall out of simultaneous valuation. Okay.
I mean, we've already deduced some of them from the get-go. If the output is bigger than the inputs, then, you know, that means that if you have a bad harvest one year, then you have negative.
Well, let's wait. We're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. And we're going to get to it.
No,
We've got situations.
I think most listeners have probably figured out in their heads at least a few cases of how this could happen. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, let's get to the examples in the book because it's easier for people to follow then. Okay. So he goes on to talk about how it doesn't work for for dual production, firms with dual production, but that's not really
what he's gonna say is wrong with it.
Yeah. So let's have a look here. He says physicalism tries to define surplus labor and profit in this manner. So what's this manner?
Yeah, it's the Steedman quote.
Yeah. Okay.
Which shows how Steedman is.
Okay, so he's basically talking
totally
about
just a Marxist.
Yeah. Okay. Things go awry because two elementary facts. Surplus labor is not the sole determinant of physical surpluses, which makes sense, and there is no such thing as the physical surplus. In light of these facts, there is simply no reason to expect a simultaneous fundamental theorem, a Marxian theorem, to hold true. The interesting and peculiar thing is that some simultaneous authors have tried to replicate Marx's conclusions in this case. In other cases, a discrepancy between their conclusions and his is construed as an error or internal consistency on his part. When, for instance, Ikishio found that his model contradicts Marx's theory that technological advances tend to lower the rate of profit, He did not try to resolve or conceal the contradiction, but simply declared that Marx's conclusion is impossible. Yet, although his model also contradicts Marx's exploitation theory of profit, and for the same reason, in this case, Ocasio tried to patch up the problem and pronounced his effort a success. Were the two?
I thought this was a great passage, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an interesting point. Like, instead of always trying to replicate Marx's conclusions when faced with a problem, it's only in this case. And maybe that's because, well, I guess Kleiman goes into it. But I just want to say, I find the kind of reasoning that Kleiman's about to do a little lazy and a little suspect, but probably 100% spot on. And we're going to get into why that is. Should I read that?
To read away.
Why are the two cases treated differently? I can think of no reason other than simultaneous authors would like one theory to be wrong and the other right. Marx's law of the tendential fall in the rate of profit has revolutionary implications. The abolition of economic crises requires the abolition of value production. And the idea that the technological advances tend to reduce profitability runs counter to physicalist intuition. The exploitation theory of profit, on the other hand, can seem to suggest the need for reform of an unfair distribution of income, and physicalists find it intuitively plausible or even obviously correct. So, again, just imputing ideological and intuitional claims, but I think this is probably spot on. It's not so much the pedigree of the law of value versus the pedigree of the falling rate of profit. I don't know what the hell that noise is, but someone's got to mute their mic.
Sorry, that was me.
Yeah. It's not the pedigree of the law of value versus the pedigree of the falling rate of profit, because the falling rate of profit has, a longer history in the literature than like even the law of value. So like it's not just that. It is like a theoretical selection. It's something somewhat intentional, and I think it's probably closer to the point about intuition than the ideological point. But I also think there's an ideological component to why people feel that, physical surplus and, value surplus is going to line up.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's also a good point about cherry picking, because
right.
I think his point about Ocasio is really spot on. That, okay, Ocasio believed that he had proved that you can't have the law of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, and at the same time have a labor theory of value. And Ocasio is gonna say, well, all right, then screw the rate of profit thing. No one cares about that. But look, we can keep the fundamental Marxian theorem. We can keep the idea or that profits are determined by the exploitation of workers. And Kleiman is saying, hey, but why pick one and not the other? That seems really arbitrary and unjustified. Like that's basically just cherry picking. And I thought that was a great point by
okay.
Andrew.
Let's go on to 10.2, the Korn model. I kind of like the first half page here. I think it's quite a good way of understanding what's at stake here. Okay. One reason why the exploitation theory of profit may seem obvious is that profit always exists under capitalism, and surplus labor presumably always exists as well. Yet their mere coexistence does not imply that surplus labor is any source of profit, much less the unique one. After all, other things always coexist with profit too. Apples, birds, cliffs, etc. have continually existed throughout the capitalist epoch. I'd like an apple theory of value. That'd be interesting. It may also be obvious to some people that the more surplus labor workers perform, the more profit there is. But this is likewise not the issue. The more heart attacks people suffer, the more death occurs. But heart attacks would be the exclusive cause of death only if, one, every case of heart attack necessarily resulted in death, and two, if it would be impossible to die except by suffering a heart attack. In precisely the same way, Surplus labor is the exclusive source of profit only and only if, in the aggregate economy, one, the performance of surplus labor necessarily results in profit in every case, and two, if it is impossible for a profit to arise except throughout the extraction of surplus labor. Okay, so that's pretty clear.
Yeah. The way that he writes this sorry.
Oh, sorry. And then and Andrew shows that the fundamental Marxian theorem, the NI and the SSSI can't uphold to these standards.
Yeah, I just want to I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Lexi. Sorry.
I just wanted to draw our attention to the way that he argues in those first two paragraphs. I don't think it's a stretch to call Andrew's argument style like more or less analytical Marxist. Like he's using fairly standard like intuition pump in the first paragraph when he talks about apples, birds, and cliffs. You'll notice that it's an A, B, and C. That's normal for analytical philosophers to do. And then in the second, he actually isolates two premises and preserves their logical relationship in order to make an argument. This is, really solid logic. Yes, this is just standard logic, not the funny Hegelian kind, just normal. Like that's a rock solid argument.
Okay. Let's have a look here at what Joan Robinson has to say.
Look at you, Mrs. Robinson.
Look at you. Yeah.
Look at you. I think you're
that's the walrus.
Totally lost.
What was she, a big woman? Is that what you're saying? You're saying, are you making like some kind of misogynist point that she was a large woman?
Wow, Manuel.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Tom, you went too far there.
Joan Robinson's second edition of her essay on Marxian economics is apparently Raffa made her life a lot easier. That's what's being said here. It's a good thing Raffa came along. Otherwise, God, making sense of Marx. Oof.
That'd be impossible. all this use value and exchange value business.
What is that about? Am I right?
Okay,
Yeah.
let's read the quote here. Consider this is what she said in 1967. Consider an economy consisting of capitalists and workers. The land is free, whose only product is Ricardo's corn. There are no prices of commodities, since there is only one commodity. The technical conditions of production determine the net product, that is, the harvest minus seed corn, the corn wage, then determines the profit. The ratio of profit or surplus corn to the corn wage is the rate of exploitation. Now it seems...
No,
shut up.
It's the rate of productivity.
Shut up.
Hold on. It's a quote. It's a quote,
Yeah.
Manuel.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Moving on.
Or the amount of surplus labor determines the amount of profit.
Now, it seems obvious that this analysis cannot be affected in essence by allowing for a variety of commodities. It does not alter the main line of argument. We shall see that the introduction of a... Okay, that's you, Puya. You're getting a bit ruffledy there.
Sorry.
We shall see that the introduction of a variety of commodities does indeed affect the argument. However, a more fundamental question remains to the corn model case as well. Just how penetrating is this analysis of exploitation? Okay. So he's going to get into a bit of a shtick here about how intuitions can be wrong. Is there anything in... Oh, yeah. So this is like getting to the kind of idea that you were saying earlier, Emmanuel. Okay. Manuel, why don't you have a read of this here? Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a whole bunch of text. Essentially what it is it's a response to to Mrs. Robinson. Can't get it off my head now. It's stuck in my ear.
Okay.
Just try that. But basically, it's saying that, okay, Robinson is saying profit is output minus inputs, and the difference between the wages. The wages are an input. It's an input cost. The workers need corn during their work year, during the season, in order to not starve and in order to be able to work. So the difference between the output and the wages that they receive in corn, the corn that remains, that's going to be the exploitation. And Andrew here takes that, runs with that thought, and imagines a case where, all right, we have these fantastic workers. They don't need any corn at all in order to sustain themselves, so they don't need any wages. However, there is something going on with the seed corn. So they plant 100 bushels of seed at the start of the year. But then something goes wrong, so they don't get 100 bushels of corn out of those 100 seeds, but they get 99, and there are no wages paid. So the outputs, that is 99, minus 100, that is minus 1 bushel. Thus, according to Mrs. Robinson here, there is negative profit. Not only that, but there's also the Marxist conception of surplus labor. So surplus labor, again, is within the Marxist conception, the amount of work you perform over and above what is needed to reproduce yourself as a worker, right? So it's the amount of work that you perform over and above your wage. And in this case, all work is over and above your wage, since you have no wage at all. Your wage is zero. So there is obviously surplus labor going on, but we have negative profit. We have minus 1 bushel in profits, and all labor performed is surplus labor, since we have zero wages.
Yeah, so just to summarize, imagine a situation where you're paid nothing and you don't need to eat, and you're working on the farm and the harvest fucks up. Well, surplus labor, but no profit.
Yeah, so you've done shitloads of weeding, you've been plowing, you've been picking, you've been doing all the watering, you've done everything.
It's a good thing
you've got less bushels at the end of it, so you don't have a profit. And like in that scenario, you've got really what's missing there is price and value. So let's read this.
That's why the concept exists.
They have price, but it's not determined by the amount of labor.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean.
He has they have a price conversion factor. Like if I say 99 multiplied by P, which is like,
okay, read this paragraph that I have highlighted here.
Is that the one with some simultaneous authors disagree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some simultaneous disagreeing with Robinson's contention that there are no prices here would prefer to express a profit in money terms. In this case, if the price per bushel of if the per bushel price of corn is $P before and after the harvest, since we are valuing the corn simultaneously, then the profit is 99 $P minus 100 $P. So you get a profit of negative $P. Once again, surplus labor has been formed, but physicalist simultaneous definitions imply that the capitalists have not gotten profit. P can not be negative. That would mean that the capitalists would pay you to take the corn off their hands, which is clearly not the case. Thus, all simultaneous interpretations, the dual system interpretations, the NI and the SSSI, come to the same conclusion. Is that the end of it?
Yeah, like I think that's probably plenty. So basically, they're saying that, like, you know, you know, if people object that there is money in there, if you use money and in this economy, it basically you end up with the same problem. Does that makes sense to everybody?
Yeah, yeah. This happens through the triple SI, the NI, the regular ass dual system one. No matter what, this essential logical dynamic is underneath. And then he moves on to Dmitriev's example.
So this is getting back to our 4p equals 5p equals 4p plus or 4p.
4p times r.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So let's see. He's talking here about a machine that produces 13 machines on its own. Okay, so he says, imagine the year begins with 10 machines which produce 13 machines, at which point the original 10 machines have worn out and become unusable. The physical profit is 13 machines. Oh, sorry, minus 10 machines, which is 3 machines. While the profit in money terms is 13p dollars minus 10p dollars is 3p dollars. If we value the input and output, equals 3p dollars if we value the input and output machines simultaneously. Thus, Dmitriev was right about the possibility of positive profit without surplus labor, if we accept any simultaneous interpretation's definition of profit. So the first one he showed us where we've got labor, okay, they were doing their harvest, we had labor performed, but no profit, okay, and the second one we showed no labor and profit, okay, so totally messing up what the FMT would say. It's like the exact opposite of what the FMT says.
Yeah, but he's being cited as, see, this guy agrees with me, like, which is kind of funny. Like, if all these like logical underpinnings are true, how many times has someone gone to someone whose underpinning logic like directly refutes them to be like, see, this guy gets it? Like, how many times does that happen in this book?
Did you guys get how they came up with the P? Is that just taken as data? Is it the price of the output divided by the units of the output? How did they come up with P?
Well,
because it's not based on labor, huh?
That's coming up now, or
what's P?
P is just the money terms conversion.
Yeah, okay. I know that, but like, what is it? Do you guys get what it's based on?
I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, because 13 is the number of machines, and then P is the price of the machine. So say if it was, if the machine was, if one machine cost $20, it'd be 13 times $20. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but is the 20 is that data, like, or is it derived from some
that's just a variable. P is like a variable.
Okay. Yeah, I know. But it's okay. Let's just keep going.
Sorry, I know. I kind of think I know what you're trying to say, but I don't. I think I'm answering it, but not sure. Like you're just thinking he just throws P in there.
No, I'm saying like what is their substance of value?
There is none.
No, there's not. It's a physicalist profit rate.
It's just all right. You sold $130,000 worth of machines. It took $100,000 worth of inputs. Thus, your profit is the difference between them, which is $30,000. That's it. There's no value or price theory here at all. It's just again going back to the Steedman quote, which is very revealing to how at least Steedman thinks, but I think it's kind of revealing to the entire simultaneous physicalist thing. It's back in let me see. It's in the beginning, and he says it's where he says that values and prices are two different coins, and they're just different expressions of the physical output. That's the way I remember the Steedman quote. I can't find it right now. We just went through it. But that's the assumption that Kleiman runs with here, is that, all right, Steedman and other simultaneists believe that there's no real reason to have a value theory or a price theory. They're all just different expressions of a physical surplus being produced. If that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question, Puya.
Maybe we should just keep going. It somewhat, but maybe my confusion will be cleared up later. Hello? Hello?
Sorry?
Yep, I'm with you.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe my confusion will be cleared up later. So maybe we should just move on.
Good question. Is a variable just gets thrown in there. What is it from like directly before? That's the case with Dmitriev. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, right.
I remember
Anyway.
the example in chapter 2. I think it was.
Let's roll.
Okay, or chapter 3.
All right, Tom,
Okay.
cut all this out. Let's roll. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, yeah. So what you want me to kick off Puya from the call? Is that it? Okay.
Oh yeah,
Let
that's
me see
what I said. Thank you for listening.
All right, here. Okay, so 10.4. Okay, so let me just read the last little tiny paragraph here, that one, because I think it's a nice little one. Although these examples are highly unrealistic, they do refute the FMT. They also make it starkly clear that the performance of surplus labor and the production of physical surplus are two different things. The existence of one does not imply the existence of the other. This is one important reason why the FMT also fails in more complex realistic cases. Okay. Now, failure of the simultaneous dual system, FMT. Okay, let's have a look here. Here he is going to talk about this concept, I think, of net physical. Is this where he talks about that thing? Let's see.
It's coming up soon. I don't think right here, but it is.
Okay, let's read it here. Okay, so
it's in the next one.
Yeah. Another key reason why the standard FMT fails is that the physical surplus is a meaningless concept once we take leave of the Korn model world. Not only is the physical surplus of each good different, but some physical surpluses are always negative. The economy-wide physical surplus of any good or service is the amount produced minus the amounts used up in production and consumed by workers. Thus, if the coal industry produces less coal today than the amount of coal that it and other industries use up and the workers consume today, which is always possible if the coal they use up and consumes comes partly or wholly from pre-existing stocks, today's physical surplus of coal is negative. Okay? So
yeah,
there are many things in the economy where we basically run down. We run down the supplies of many different things. You know, this year's Nike runners get run down. Next year they're not produced. It's ubiquitous. Latest Samsung or iPhone, they will produce for a year or two. They will be run down. Okay, so it's a core element of capitalist production.
Yeah, and it's also really important to note here. Where he says, again, the last sentence there, the economy-wide physical surplus of any good or service is the amount produced minus the amounts used up in production and consumed by workers. So a good example of this is oil. I think some of you might have heard about the concept of peak oil, which is basically where it's an economy thing where cheap oil is no longer available. So we're running out of cheap oil. Now we have to do fracking and all of these expensive methods in order to get the oil that we need. And this concept is pretty much the concept is defined as actually the amount of oil that we need and that we consume is more than the oil that we can produce. So the physical output, the oil that we extract from nature today, is less than the oil that we currently need in order to have our economy running. This is, why we save stocks of things to account for that fact, and so on. So it's not. This is something that always happens. If you've heard, in the West we consume 5 Earths worth of resources. That's what this is about. The inputs are higher than the outputs, and so there is negative physical profit, and yet evidently capitalism is fine and can turn a profit. So that's just a little footnote, but
yeah, I think it's linked, but I don't think it's exactly the same, because say, for example, in the oil industry, we produce the oil because there's crude, but to actually get, say, for example, usable oil, we have to produce that, and we create, say, 1,000, oil tankers a day of clean usable oil, and then in that same day we use up 2,000, so we're in a negative situation. But in essence, oil is a finite stock that's not being regenerated by the planet on any level.
Exactly.
Maybe I'm being very pernickety there,
but even if it were, it's still the case that we are consuming oil at a faster pace than we can bring it up from or extract it. And according to the physicalist definition,
well, no, that's not true, because we have oil reserves. It's not like our reserves are run like it's not like our buffer stocks of oil that the US government and them are dropping. They're stable.
Exactly. That's the point. That is why stocks are needed. That's what I said.
Okay.
This is why you need stocks. Because if you didn't have stocks, then everything would come crashing down. So the implication here, and he's going to comment on this. I think that's the footnote, actually, footnote 10. Today's fiscal surplus of coal is negative. Footnote 10, where Kleiman talks about this.
Okay. Sorry,
But you're entirely right. But that is a reason why we need stocks, is precisely because some years the during some periods the physical profits are going to be negative. If that didn't happen, then there would, if that was impossible, then there would be no need for any stocks to exist at all. If it always was the case that a physical surplus could be produced, then stocks would be completely unnecessary. And my point is simply that you can have, we are living in an economy right now that is negative in physical surplus, but is evidently positive in value or dollar surplus. And the only reason why everything hasn't come crashing down is because we have stocks. If we have stocks, then that means that it's intuitive. Everyone knows that negative physical profits are possible and happen all the time. And so there's evidently people planning for this who realize that, you know, sometimes we use more resources than we have, and who do not think that that is the same thing as what's happening with the dollar price of gasoline. Does that make
okay? Let's keep going.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's keep going.
This is becoming a speech.
Lexi, do you want to have a jump at this bit?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. It is fundamentally because of this simple fact that the standard simultaneous dual system, fundamental Marxian theorem, fails when surplus labor and profit are interpreted as, quote, simply labor and monetary expressions of the physical surplus. Then either can be positive while the other is negative, given that the physical surplus of at least one good is negative. In order to see this, Steedman's terms need to be defined precisely. The simultaneous dual system interpretation of Marx's theory maintains that total surplus labor is the total labor time value of physical surpluses, and total profit is similarly the total price of the physical surpluses. Note that these definitions are simultaneous. The same per unit values and prices are attributed to the coal used as input at the start of the period and coal produced at the end. Thus, if we have a two-commodity economy in which the physical surpluses of the two goods are 1 and 10, while the labor time values of the goods are 55 and 5, then total surplus labor is math 105. And if the goods money prices are 54 and 6, then the total profit is math 114. So yeah, they don't equal each other.
Okay, so
yeah, here we have a situation where we have more profit than surplus labor. So this shows that the sole determinant of profit is not surplus labor with
Over
this
and over,
definition.
Over and over again, you know, it requires all the values to be above 0 to work.
So basically, he just gives another simple example whereby small variations in production and prices can give you negative profit with work. Okay. Okay, so this is important. Okay. These three paragraphs, I think, are very important. Okay. Physicalists, so this is Andrew trying to say, like, physicalists have said that, you know, in a case where you had like an economy with elements running down production, so say, like, you know, we were running down our coal, okay, we're consuming more than we're producing, that economy simply wouldn't be able to reproduce itself because you're running down all these necessary stocks. Okay, so like you might be able to do that on the short term, but that economy will fall apart. Okay, so let's read about the objections to that. Physicalists instinctively respond to this refutation by denying the relevance of economies in which some physical surplus is negative, on the ground that such economies cannot reproduce themselves. This objection is not well founded. In the first place, it has no bearing on the logical question at issue. If surplus labor and profit could fail to coexist in these economies, even in one period, before they run themselves into the ground, and we have seen that they could, given simultaneous dual system definitions, that in itself proves that surplus labor is not the exclusive source of profit. Okay, so in the first place, you know, you only have to get one example to prove it is wrong. And if that's the year before, if that's like the year before everybody dies because of lack of corn, so be it. Okay. And then secondly, such economies certainly can and do reproduce themselves. We live in them. They are harvest failures. There are days in which the coal industry produces less coal than the other industries use up and workers consume. There are also commodities that get used up in production and consumed but never reproduced because they are replaced by commodities that serve similar purposes. So think of like old-fashioned typewriters before the word processor came in. You know, people just sold them, they used them up, and they didn't produce any more. Indeed, these latter two phenomena are so common that there is undoubtedly a negative physical surplus of some commodity at every single instant. That's pretty, yeah.
That is this right here, footnote 12.
Okay, let's go.
Because I didn't realize this first time reading this chapter, but Kleiman apparently thinks this is one of the most important points. And when I read that footnote, I was like, holy shit. So footnote 12 reads, I am indebted to Alan Freeman for emphasizing this crucial point. It shows that economies cannot rigorously be theorized as systems in which inputs are reproduced as outputs.
So, like, because this is like an intuition that I have that if you do this, it would break like the dynamics of a system.
Yes, but that is Raffa's point. So basically, this was a frigging bomb when I read it, and the reason is this: Strophians, again, haven't read Raffa's original paper, but like the point is, so why do we equate output and input prices? It's because an economy has to be able to reproduce itself, right? So we can't, we have to produce at least as much corn as is needed for wages. Otherwise, you know, people will starve and the economy will collapse. So every economy has to be able to reproduce itself. Thus, the amount of inputs needed and the outputs, they have to equalize, because otherwise the economy cannot reproduce itself. And here Kleiman is saying that Freeman's point shows, which in Kleiman speak means logically proves, that let's see, so I don't get his wording wrong, that a reproduction model of economies cannot be rigorously defined or rigorously described. What was the yeah, let's see, I got it here. It shows that economies cannot rigorously be theorized as systems in which inputs are reproduced as outputs. That is a pretty damning critique of, I think, most of the Strophian lineage. Because
absolutely, you
know, obviously they don't. some of the inputs never get replaced. They're just inputs, and there are no they don't enter the product again as outputs. That is the key to the dynamics of I think any real economy. You also have, just harkening back to my too long rambling about stocks in response to you, Tom, that was indeed footnote 10, that where Kleiman says that a negative physical surplus is the same thing as a depletion of stocks. So
yeah.
All right,
cool.
Moving on.
Lexi, do you want to have a read of this bit? I think this is important. This is our last bit, and then we're going to move on. Hello, Lexi.
All right, hold on.
Having an argument.
Yeah, there's some transphobe in the chat that's going to have to get the wall in the revolution. Anyway, so let's see. Because of the fundamental Marxian theorem. Yeah, what's up?
Really?
I was going to say that the wall is not. The wall is not some like sexual position or something, is it?
No. It's an album by Roger Waters. Because the fundamental Marxian theorem is a claim about the real world, it would be illegitimate to assume these phenomena away when assessing whether the theorem is true or not. One would be assuming away the very conditions of the problem. It is certainly possible, on the other hand, to put forth a different theorem about hypothetical economies, in which all physical surpluses are positive at every moment. Yet such a theorem would also fail to demonstrate that surplus labor is the unique source of profit, even in these hypothetical economies, because something in addition to surplus labor would have to be would be needed in order to guarantee that profit is positive. Positive physical surpluses of everything all the time. Some authors, Mohan Bensiani, have objected to my use of, quote, arbitrary values and prices to disprove the fundamental Marxian theorem. This objection is likewise irrelevant to the logical issue at hand. If there are any possible sets of prices and values at which surplus labor and profit would fail to coexist, then surplus labor is simply not the exclusive source of profit. I find this all
I just think
that's just
I just
like,
think it's
don't bullshit.
Go ahead.
This chapter is real analytical Marxism. When I talk about something that isn't just a nominal group of scholars and it's a real like approach, I'm talking about using just basic ass analytical logic that you would make any point with and use it to make Marxist points. Here we are. This is why a bunch of scholarship is bullshit. Here.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, like that anybody could defend, could make the point that, well, you're just picking certain numbers to make my theorem fail. Like to
a theorem
to a mathematician, that is a hilarious thing. That's right. Just like, that is hilarious. The fact that you can try and defend a theory by saying, well, you're just picking kind of tricky little values is a fucking joke. You know, that's called joke scholarship. And that is just beyond me. I think it's just disgrace. Absolute scholarly disgrace.
Yeah. Like if there isn't some misrepresentation, like I'm just trying to think. Like
I've read Veneziani's paper.
I've read it too. It too. I don't understand. Like I feel like I'm, in like in a very crazy relationship or something when I'm trying to think about Marxian economics, and I have to like retreat within myself and like sort of try to like figure out if things are true in a way that I so rarely like. I don't know. I find this to be like more mystifying than other factors of like Marxist academic debate. And like, I'm puzzled. There's supposed to be objective standards of fucking math here. Like, that's the whole point. That's the whole idea of mathematical logic. That's the whole idea of mathematics. Like, that you have very cut and dry answers. I don't understand how this vagary could come up. Like, this is wrong.
Well, I think that would be a reasonable objection for certain numbers. Like, if Andrew said that workers performed negative living labor or capitalists advanced negative capital,
right.
I think this would be a reasonable objection. But he's saying something that's like totally realistic, that that we just produced less stuff of a product this turnover relative to the last one.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. But like, I think they're making the opposite of that point, because they're not saying he picked logically impossible values. He just picked, regular random values to disprove it. Like, if that was their point, it would be a fucking watertight point. But it's the opposite of their point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, yeah. So it's like, I just find this, I just find that disgusting. Reading this stuff, that makes me angry.
Yeah, like your model has to be able to. I mean, it has to make. You can't just put any number in there. It has to be a model of the thing that you're trying to model, and it has to make sense. But Andrew's model, it totally makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Right, moving onwards. Let's have a look and see what's this subchapter about. This is more the same, isn't it? It's basically the same shit.
There's
again.
a nice table. There's a nice table though.
There is a table. Well, so this one, what he's showing is that he basically, so he's going to show in this, he has a table here, table 10.1, where he goes through two industries and he shows how, over, say, a 2-day period, it will reproduce itself. But in each individual day, one of them will have a surplus and one of them will have a what's the opposite of a surplus? A deficit. So he shows that even, you know, it's pretty common that, you know, you would have a deficit on one day and then a surplus in another day, and over the 2-day period the whole thing balances out. And like, I know this from when I was used to work with my father in the creamery, and we used to be producing milk in a co-op where my father used to work, and they would have you know, you would do skim milk, which would be like, you know, less than 0.5% fat. You take the fat and the cream out of the milk, and you would do a batch of skim milk, and you do that maybe 1 day a week, and they would sell that skim milk over the week, and then on other days they would produce other types of milk. And so every day one of the stocks is getting run down, but one of them is probably getting run up, and that's just normal production. That is like standard production in factories. They don't set up a factory, because usually like factories will produce, you know, one production line can produce many different varieties of the same thing. It's not like they're producing all of these at the same amount at the same time. It's just the opposite of what would go on under capitalism. So what Andrew is showing here is that, like, you have, you know, these things balance out. So the production, they might balance each out over 2 days or 4 or whatever. And he also goes on to show then, if you just have slight variations in I think the price, he'll show that you know, let's read what he says here about, I think it's price he varies. Let's have a look here. Sorry, look at my book version.
Yeah, it's in the prices where the aggregates don't.
Okay. So like so however, even the slightest deviation from this equilibrium can cause total positive profit to be positive despite the lack of surplus labor. If, for instance, the price of apples and broccoli are $100 and $99, then total profit on day 1 is $1. And if the prices switch $99 and $100 other way around on day 2, then total profit is $1 on that day too. Over the entire 2-day period, profit in each industry is $1. And since the economy reproduces itself, it will be possible to have positive profit without surplus labor forever. Again, according to the dual system definitions. You know,
yeah,
so that's
this is why people like you know, equilibrium theorists, not to drop any names, but this is why the equilibrium is so important, because if prices don't tend to equilibrate over time, then Kleiman is right. There can be positive profit without surplus labor forever. But that is why equilibrium theorists really have to go out of their way to prove why Kleiman's example here wouldn't apply. That you can't have these deviations over time. You can't even have slight deviations. They always diverge to 0. But yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else want to say anything about this chapter? I don't want to dwell too long on these tables, because the general gist is very simple to understand. And so in that previous, in what I just said there, in the table 10.1, there is no surplus labor because all output is wages. Okay. So what he's saying, that when you have all output is wages and just slight variations in price deviations, you can end up with profit with no surplus labor forever.
Yeah, interest making these theories look really ridiculous.
Yeah, like this is really embarrassing. And these are supposed to be, you know, the new foundations of Marxist theory. I mean, you have to imagine that there are rooms of, like, I don't know. I guess, Puya, what you were saying, and Emmanuel, what you were saying about, like, the intuitions that go into Schraffianism and the intuitions going into equilibrium theory, and, like, how, I don't know, how that sort of structures the intellectual environment has to account for this, because this paradigm is stupid. It's not like all these people are so dumb. You know what I mean? It's just like they're kind of in this, they're in this methodology that doesn't make sense, like kind of constitutionally from where we're coming from in terms of our intuition.
Yeah, I read a little bit of Sraffa's book, and it was exactly how Andrew describes it.
All right.
Like with
It's-
it's very physical. Yeah, it's exactly like Andrew describes it.
well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's his book was The Production of Commodities by Commodities. Isn't that what it is? The reproduction of.
Yeah, yeah. I
There
mean,
you
it's in the
go.
name.
Yeah, I mean, if he would have just titled it "The Production of Use Values by Use Values," I don't think any Marxist would have any beefs with Raffa. because
Yeah,
it's obviously true. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're just looking at use values, it's perfectly true. You get more stuff if you're more productive. More stuff
Yeah.
is more gooder.
Yeah, like I don't think he's wrong. Like I just think he's just looking at something else. He's just looking at the physical economy. Like yeah,
Huh.
like when he's examining the physical economy, like I don't think it's like, you know, I don't. He might not be. I haven't like looked at it incredibly carefully, but he might have a point when it comes to just like the economy outside of value production.
That's interesting. Oh, that's very
Yeah.
interesting because, like, even though there's no, all right, even if you're going to be consistent Marxist, there's no abstract unit of use value, right? That's not a thing. But like, you could at least do Schraffian math for each sector. You know what I mean? And you wouldn't. And if you did it, like, I don't know. I'm imagining that you can use Schraffianism as a parallel discourse to talk about the physical economy, but not use it to try to do real value shit. And maybe like integrate some of the best parts of it into a broader Marxist project, as long as it doesn't replace the theoretical core. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember us talking about this a few episodes ago, where can't remember whom of us what
Well, it's in the
but,
context of the third thing argument.
no,
it kind of like varies.
I'm sorry,
It kind of like
go ahead.
Well, I think I would have to read it more carefully, but I think it kind of like it's kind of hit and miss. But I mean, I think it's like he's just dealing with a different set of issues, and it's just like, yeah, he's not dealing with labor values.
No, and I remember us actually making a similar point a few episodes ago, when we talked about, Straussian economics is perfectly true as long as we're dealing with physical outputs, and it might be super useful for, I don't know, luxury automated gaze-based communism or something, wherein we have to calculate, how much corn to produce, etc. But it's not.
Right.
It's not. It doesn't pertain to the economy in which we live now, where a physical shortage tends to raise prices,
Right.
and thus also raise profits often. So it's the opposite relation
Or
within capitalism, but there's nothing wrong really with Straussian economics, as long as all you're doing is calculating physical outputs of use values, like, I don't know, logs or timber or stuff.
or I think you meant there's a physical shortage, so the amount of labor it takes to produce it, so the price is stay constant as long as the total labor performed is constant.
Yeah, I mean, I meant per unit price. So that's Marx's quote there from chapter 2, that the same amount of labor always produces the same amount of value regardless of any change in productivity. So you're exactly right that the value produced, the value added by living labor, is the same regardless of how many bushels of corn are harvested. But in a shortage, since we have performed as much labor, but we've had a lot less a lot fewer bushels of corn, those bushels of corn are going to be more expensive.
Oh yeah. I was talking about like the total price of the corn.
Yeah,
Sorry
exactly. Yeah.
Sorry if it was confusion. All right.
No. It's perfectly. It's good that we do these things so that we can clarify what's going on.
Okay, I just got my oranges delivered to me there. Thank you very much, Precious.
Who is Precious?
That's my missus.
Oh, okay.
Orange delivery. Okay.
That's nice of her.
I sort of imagine she's Keiko O'Brien because Star Trek, but I know she's not.
Oh yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I don't look very much like you, man. What's his name in real life?
Just Chief O'Brien.
Chief Miles O'Brien.
What's his name? What's Chief O'Brien's name?
Miles O'Brien.
Colin Meaney. But I used to drink in the same pub as him in Dublin.
Oh no! Shit.
Oh really?
We had the same local in Phibsborough. Let me see if I can get the name of what the pub was. Phibsborough.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite Star Trek and Marxist trivia right there. That's the best.
Yeah, Phibsborough pubs. Let me see.
Of course, the O'Briens are drinking together.
When it turns out that Chief O'Brien's great granddad was a revolutionary worker who organized labor strikes.
Oh yeah.
And where Rom says a Ferengi says "Workers of the world unite," and they quote the Communist Manifesto. It's great.
Oh yeah, I forgot that one. Yeah, that's been a while.
Oh my god! So Tom, that's you.
That is me.
Holy shit!
Let me see. I'll get the picture of the pub that he used to drink in for some
we should
Star
call
Trek nerds.
CBS and proclaim this series to be Star Trek Canon.
Yeah, this is definitely canon. Well, we're watching a Star Trek episode with Tom tomorrow, actually. So that's
somebody want to see in it.
Yeah.
Here's a picture of the inside of the pub. Can you see that there?
Oh, that's so cool.
Are you doing another Swamp Side episode with Tom?
It's a nice pub, isn't it?
That's funny.
Fucking fantastic.
Oh my god, that's beautiful. What a beautiful pub.
It's a working class pub. It's not like
no, but it's
not
class. Like it's classy in metaphorical sense. Yeah.
What do we have on tap here? It's always the Guinness in there. Great pub. Okay, been a long time since I've been in there.
Oh man, that's a good place.
You had a different name back in the day, though. I think maybe they've changed the name of it. Anyway, sorry about that. That's a bit of a detour. Okay, so it's very funny. Have any of you guys ever seen the film that he's in called the Snapper?
Oh, I haven't.
It's he did a couple of some Roddy Doyle. I mean, you know the novelist Roddy Doyle. He does these or the film The Commitments. You seen The Commitments? Anybody?
No, I'm culturally illiterate.
No, that was a big hit. It got I got Oscar nominations and stuff back in the early 90s, late 80s. But he was a really big, famous Irish author. But anyway, this story is going nowhere. Okay, let's move it on. 10.6.
That's interesting to me. Anyway, we'll move on. Thank you. This is our detour into Irish culture.
Yeah, Roddy Doyle is funny. You should watch The Snapper. Is a funny ass film if anybody wants to watch a good comedy. Colin Meaney he plays a character in there's a trilogy of films and he's like a father in them. He's a total loser. There's another one called The Van where he sets up a chip shop. Very good films. Now, okay. I'm selling them hard. Okay. We got 10.6 where basically he goes in and shows the exact same failure, well, a very similar failure when we look at the FMT version for the new interpretation and the TSSI. Okay.
Can we just take a moment to appreciate this this headline? Failure of the NI-SSSI FMT.
Now
this is why people hate us.
Well, no, we promised that we're going to call that the SSSI just so it doesn't. It's not literally alphabet soup.
All right. So failure of the NI-SSI FMT. It's still why people hate us.
Much better.
Like, if you know what this means, you are one of maybe 12 people who who understands this debate. I just think it's awesome that we actually understand what this is about. But it's just when it popped out on the screen, like, what people have to think we're crazy.
Seriously,
it is the most esoteric debate. It's just so esoteric. It's like, what? None of your average socialist probably has even like heard of a transformation problem.
I'm just imagining the Girl Scouts like knocking, like, have you heard the good news about the NI-SSI FMT and how it's
you know, to me it just sounds like a really, really fucking complicated wrestling move. So I kind of like the sound of it.
To me, it sounds like a laptop model or something. Or like a graphics card. Oh man, the NI-SSI FMT. I want that.
Yeah, it sounds like model numbers. You know, you're exactly. Like looking up. Yeah, you're like looking up the model number of your thing, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's it.
I found it actually. I found the picture of the actual wrestling move that this one is.
Right, let's see this shit.
Let me just get it. It's a bit small. Let me get it here.
Let me tell you, that guy, he pulled a NI-SSI FMT back in '79.
Holy moly!
There it is. You can see that there. That's the
FMT. Oh my god!
That's climbing right there on the with the simultaneous.
That one there. That one's quite good too. I like that one.
Tom, can you please make this the thumbnail for the
thumbnail?
and Photoshop Kleiman's head onto the guy taking him down, and put Raffa's head on the guy he's taking down.
Yeah, there might be. Is there? Oh, how about here? This is the one. That's the one we want.
That's the one. That's the one. NI-SSI DDT, whatever.
Yeah,
we have to get Donald Trump to say the TSSI so that people will be like, yeah, we need it.
Oh my god, we should just tweet about the TSSI to Donald Trump.
What is the TSSI? It's something that we needed for a long time. Trump's gonna make it happen.
We need MMT. We need TSSI.
What about this one? I like this one.
Yeah, the faces here are just especially that guy's face is just like, ugh. Like, yeah, I don't know.
I like his hand. I like the hand with a little thumb up there on the side.
Yeah. This looks
somebody
I'm not gonna lie,
just giving it a thumbs up.
This looks very pornographic.
All wrestling is. Okay, let's move on. I'm sorry about that detour into my mind. Now we have oh dear, this one is okay.
This one incorporates a simultaneous melt, I believe, which is fun.
It does.
And so this is where the melt is from this context, I think. Like, so I mean, he's criticized the NI and the SSI quite a bit, but those are the people who developed the melt at first.
Okay, so he gets into the same idea, the physical net product. Okay, so this is similar to what we used in the previous chapter. Okay, so this is total product minus used up input. This is the net product. It doesn't have wages in it though this time for some reason. I don't know why. But so one is physical surplus and this is net product. Okay, slightly different. Okay, and then he just gets on to say the total price of the physical surpluses can be negative. So the just as the total price of the physical surpluses can be negative, so can the price of the net product. So the PNP, the economy-wide total price of all the net products. The PNP is a simultaneous concept because once again, a unit of coal that enters production at the start of some period is valued at the same price as the unit of coal produced at the end. Okay. Mm-hmm. If there were negative net products of only a few goods, but their prices were relatively high to other goods, very high relative to other goods, then the PMP would be negative. Okay, so the price of the net product of the entire economy could be negative. Although this is unlikely, it's certainly possible in principle. You know, say for example, if you had an economy like I don't know, Saudi Arabia, and there was a massive strike on in the oil sector, you could imagine the PMP would be negative on a day. You know, so it's not a ridiculous thing. Okay. No, economy-wise, it's quite unusual, but like it's not impossible. Okay. So it's this possibility of a negative PMP which causes the NISSI version of the FMT to fail. These interpretations maintain the PMP as a monetary expression of the new value added by workers. I don't know, we're going to get into stuff here where we don't really know that much about it, but it fails for the same reason as the previous one, pretty much. Do people want to get into it? I find... we know the critique, and we're going to have a goddamn...
Yeah, we already covered the melt. We know what simultaneous means, right? And we remember the previous examples where having a negative in the wrong place breaks everything. This is just variations on a theme.
Okay,
maybe we could talk about the table.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Who wants to go? Do you want to go for it, Puya?
Yeah, sure. I'll go for it. Okay. So when we're talking about the simultaneous melt, it has its price as data, and which is bold. The bold things are the data in the chart. So we have price as data, net product as data, labor as data, and wages as data. Wages in price terms. And so what it says is that the profit is equal to the net product minus the wages. And so here we have the net product, the price of a net product is 100 in the first situation, minus wages, it's 40. And that corresponds to 2 hours of surplus labor. And the wages correspond to 3 hours of necessary labor. And but in year 2, using the simultaneous melt, which is dividing the net product by the amount of labor, let me make sure, by the total amount of labor performed, it is so we get a net product of -10 because the price of product A fell, and that was such a large proportion of the economy. So we have a price of a net product of -10, and so when we divide it by 5, we get a melt of -$2 per hour. So what this ends up saying is that the capitalist, with the wage of $60 still, this corresponds to -30 hours of necessary labor. Yeah, well, necessary labor because it's the amount of labor in the wage, and then and then 35 hours of profit, which corresponds to -$70 in profit. And so Andrew also says that this doesn't make any sense because you have negative profit and you have 35 hours of surplus labor, and you also have 5 hours of total labor and 35 hours of surplus labor. And did you guys get his comment where he was like, our attentive listeners will notice that this is 35 hours of surplus labor and 5 hours of total labor? And he was like, I was like, oh no, I'm not an attentive listener. I didn't notice that. and
I thought he was being sarcastic. I thought he was being sarcastic there.
Oh, really? I thought he was like taking a shot at me. I was like, oh man, Andrew, you can't do this to me.
No. He just means like, this is pretty fucking obvious. Like you don't, I don't know. I usually interpret that kind of stuff from him as you don't have to be Einstein to realize this.
Yeah.
Because attentive, read the paragraph here. attentive readers will have noted that surplus labor in year 2, 35 hours, exceeds the total amount of labor performed by 5 hours. This is not an error on my part. Surplus labor is total labor minus variable capital in labor terms. Because the simultaneous melt is negative, so is variable capital in labor time terms. The workers produce an equivalent of their wages in less than no time. Thus, surplus labor is greater than the total labor performed. You know, people might say, oh, well, those values that you assume, the ones in bold in those tables, are ridiculous. But I don't think so. Let's say
they really aren't.
Let's say you had let's say you had, you know, your A and your B. Your A is oil and your B is cars. Typewriters. Take your pick. And we know that, like, you know, commodities like oil and that can easily crash 50% in a year, totally regularly. You know, they went from $150 a barrel to like what, $40 a barrel in 2008, something crazy like that. Yeah. You know, and in that kind of a scenario here, in your model economy, you basically end up with showing that, you know, your theory can't cope with those type of price movements. It just falls on its ass. And it shows that, you know, your simultaneous melt is nonsensical. And so there's something fundamentally wrong with your ideas here.
Yeah, like you can't have negative wages, negative necessary labor. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Like, because it's dependent on the price of a net product, the simultaneous melt, it ends up making completely incoherent predictions.
Okay. Right. Anybody want to say any more on that? Will we go on the next bit?
Thanks for the melt, guys.
You're welcome. Was that where it came from?
Yeah. It comes from them, and so maybe we can have a good plucky, you know, post-Christian Hegelian attitude about it, and be like, well, it's a shame we had to go through all this bullshit, but at least we got the melt out of it.
Okay. Let's have a look here. Okay, so now we get to this chapter, which is called Surplus Labor and Profit under the TSSI. Okay, now this chapter is laden with some
oh yeah,
kind of, like, if people can see on the screen here, it's a bad start.
Give me that.
There's a lot of
T real at time t or time t+1. That's what I want.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's kind of pretty, like, the math is not very difficult. It is purely just pretty much algebra and a few algebraic substitutions and stuff like that. But it's kind of tricky to describe it. I think we should talk about the conclusions. Okay. What do you think? Yeah, because I think okay, let me talk about what he's going to show here. Okay. So what Andrew is going to show in this chapter is he's going to show that when you use the definitions that the TSSI is based upon, that essentially what Marx is based upon, when you follow through the logic of trying to figure out where the profit comes from, you will find that it consistently will make sense, and it will show that the profit is essentially can only and ever be from the amount of surplus labor. Okay.
And it doesn't come to ridiculous conclusions. It's impossible for it to come to ridiculous conclusions.
Exactly. It comes to what you would expect them to come to. There are no places where you have to have negative work to maintain the system, or negative prices to maintain it. The prices are positive, labor is positive, and everything works out. I found this interesting. I found this, we talk about Marx. This is what I find kind of very good about this section, is that 10.7 is that, I've read Capital, read a lot of this stuff. And you say, Marx says, the exploitation theory of profit or whatever, and you go, yeah, that makes sense in your head and all that. But then when you actually sit down, you write the equations, and you really don't just go with your kind of common sense or your kind of a kind of literary approach. When you sit down and you actually mathematize it up and you follow out the things, that it's entirely coherent. And it really, for me, was a powerful result. I found this part. It's a pity that it's that mathematical, but
I kind of wish it was in capital, to be honest.
Well, yeah. I mean, don't we all? But
yeah, this would have been great.
But if you think about it, this is sort of the most analytically valuable part of the book. It's showing, you know, if you were going to try to model Marx's theory in a real economy, this is the basic analytic you use to make to translate between prices and values.
Sorry, I'm just eating my orange. Okay.
Good.
Okay, so I don't know if we want to get into any of these equations here because they all work. I've gone through them painstakingly, and I think everybody else has too. They're not that difficult. But
maybe we can.
Maybe look at a bit of the conclusion text.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the kind of conclusion test. He ends up with this equation here, 10.1. Oh, sorry. No, he ends up. He actually ends up with this one here, where he goes. So this is the equation we end up with, which is basically the real rate of profit is equal to the melt times the surplus labor performed. Okay, and that's the exploitation of theory there in that one equation. Yeah, when we've done all our messing around, he goes on to say then.
Well, just one thing before you.
Yeah, go on.
I think it's important to also talk about equation 10.3. I think it is.
Let's have a look here.
Or where that
the nominal rate of profit one, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
That I think this is kind of important, that with the TSSI you can have nominal profit and no surplus labor. But it depends on the real rate of profit. For the TSSI depends on Yeah. I thought this was an important point.
That's something that we've actually seen before in a non-mathematical sense, haven't we? We've seen it. Whereabouts? Let me see if I can find it. It was in,
I think it was chapter 7.
Chapter 7, when we were dealing with the falling rate of profit. Does anybody remember when? Sorry, I'm just trying to say it as well. Like we've seen it as well, like, which is an interesting one. Do you remember when? Do you remember, Emmanuel, when me and you were getting our heads melted trying to figure out the falling rate of profit bit?
I remember.
And it worked out that it was like the nominal rate that was kind of throwing us, and so what he's saying here, you can actually have a nominal rate, and you can have like no surplus labor, but that's not. It's the real rate that we're really interested in.
The inflation adjusted rate, which is the
which
price,
ends up here, essentially.
Yeah, which is the output price multiplied by the ratio of the first melt to the new melt at the input melt to the output melt.
I find that pretty sophisticated to adjust for inflation, but not for time one and time t overall. Like you still do the thing that Simultaneous are claiming that their whole thing is motivated by. In a way, you understand what I'm saying? Like, they just want to make sure that the measurement, is going to work, like that the prices are commensurate, to make sure that they're in the same kind of dollars. And they do that without adjusting everything, all the prices. Like this does that without doing the sin of simultaneism. It's really sophisticated. Anyway.
Yeah, Marx is like kicking ass from the grave. Okay. Let's see. Let this one here, where he talks about the equation up that we've had here. He says so basically he says basically in the other case we had the melt being negative, and that's what caused everything to screw up for the NI and the TSSI FMT. But in the TSSI one, basically it won't fuck up. The only way it could ever fuck up would be if the melt, the initial melt, was negative. Okay, but that kind of makes no sense. That would mean that when the economy started in, the capitalist economy in northern Italy, or wherever you want to call it, 1721, people were paid, had to pay to work for somebody else. Yeah, they weren't paid a wage. They paid a capitalist so they could go to work on the first one.
Yeah.
And then from then on, they were always negative.
Negative melt. There we go. I mean, if you can't account for that, how can you say you can account for a capitalist economy, Tom?
Yeah. So it's so like the last one here is what Andrew says is thus the TSSI, in contrast to all simultaneous interpretations of Marx's value theory, succeeds in deducing his conclusions that surplus labor is the exclusive source of profit. So that's a real important finding, I think, for the TSSI. We've seen that it solves the falling rate of profit, it solves the transformation problem, and it solves the exploitation theory of surplus value or of profit, or whatever we want to call that.
And
so they're three.
And I also think it's also is consistent with the text too, like the Capital. I think it's also consistent with just Marx's work. Like it doesn't have to remake his work to work.
Fortunately.
Okay. All right, that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, this chapter is pretty dense. It's not that long, but I mean, look at the footnotes. I mean, Jesus.
We haven't finished it yet.
Yeah.
10.8. So in the 10.8 one, basically, it shows how the TSSI is able to handle a case where there is a negative price of net product. Have I got that correct? PNP is the...
Yes, I think so. Yep.
Price of the net product. So the case where, the entire economy has basically run down itself. This happens in recessions. Our GDP can drop 3% from the previous year, 10%, and in that case, you're producing less. And if there's no inflation, say inflation, you will, if there's not deflation, you will basically be running down your economy in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so Andrew goes through here and shows that when you do that, when you adjust for the rate of inflation, the negative PNP doesn't cause the whole thing to fall apart, and it stays true. Okay, so very important, I think. Does anybody want to read the conclusion here? Alexi, you're very good at reading.
Thank you. I try.
Yeah. Do you want to have a go at this conclusion to finish up this chapter?
Sure, but I'm warning you, there's some French names, and there's not going to be any French names by the time I'm done with them. So,
Lexi, why do you think I asked?
Thank you. Owing to their static character, simultaneous interpretations of Marx's value theory grant no role in explaining the dynamics of capitalism. Although some proponents of simultaneous interpretations have acknowledged this fact, they seem untroubled by it. Dumenil and Levy, for instance. Dumenil and Levy, for instance, for instance, contend that, quote, the core of the explanatory power of the labor theory of value lies in the analysis of exploitation as the origin of profit. Other theories also exist independently of labor value, such as the theory of crisis or of historical tendencies. In particular, the labor theory of value does not provide the framework to account for disequilibrium and dynamics in capitalism, as this chapter has shown, however. The attempts to fragment Marx's value theory into static and dynamic aspects and to embrace the former but jettison the latter have not succeeded. When his value theory is interpreted in static terms, it is not only his explanations of dynamic issues, like the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, that seem false. His explanation of the origin of profit, a putatively static issue, seems false as well. Conversely, the TSSI, which vindicates the internal consistency of Marx's value theory in other respects, also vindicates the logical coherence of his exploitation theory of profit. His value theory is far more of a, quote, package deal than has hitherto been recognized.
I think that's really like that bit where that sentence here. Sorry, when the value theory is interpreted in static terms, it's not only his explanation of dynamic issues like the tendency of rate of profit to fall, his explanation of the origin of profit, a putatively static issue, seems false as well. Like, that's kind of curious, really, when you think about it.
Well, it is really interesting that you can't remake the fundamentals of his theory. It's like a credit to his theory in a way that, like, you need it to get his, like, to construct his world. Like, there's not other tools to construct this world. And he's not using something like, I don't know, obviously weird and dumb to get to, like, these conclusions. And so it's not something that I think makes his method questionable that he comes to these conclusions. It's a credit to him that, like, he's done something that you can't, like, replicate very easily. Marx has a tremendously weird theory in that respect. Like, you kind of, I don't know, most theories you can kind of reconstruct in different ways, but here, once you lose that main mechanism, like, it is very hard to use all the sticky tape for an ad hoc recreation of one of the elements without the others. They really are like a theoretical totality.
It's kind of amazing to me, though, like, that, you know, I know we followed the whole book, but it's still kind of amazing that, like, the origin of profit is somehow intrinsically linked to the dynamic time level of capital. That's a weird result, isn't it?
It's tremendously weird, and it is exactly that kind of Popperian or Lakatoshian, like, kind of like small buy-in, you know, big dynamic outcomes kind of system. Like, that's sort of the irony of all that sort of, you know, that section of philosophy of science. I think if you really take Marx's value theory on its own terms, like, you actually do have a theory with low buy-in and high cash value, you know, if you'll excuse the metaphor.
Yeah, no, I just think obviously there's something deep about time when it comes into the trying to analyze the economy, that it even affects static issues like exploitation. And that's just a very fundamentally kind of non-trivial and like kind of non-intuitive finding, I think, from this chapter.
Yeah. The people that don't do the math of Marx's value theory, I think, are missing what makes it tie together. I think people can logically understand what makes it tie together without going through all this. But when you kind of realize there's not, like, very many ways to, like, represent this theory, like, literally. It's not just a matter of the word games go together in history. Like, there's a theoretical core. I think it's underappreciated because I think that whole section of analysis is pretty much choked off and brain dead in most Marxist circles. So
yeah, and that you made a great point there the other day when I was editing and I was re-listening to it, and it really got me, was when you were saying, you know, about how when comes to the falling rate of profit, like that, when you can't reproduce it at the macro level, it's this weird small micro level dynamic that when you get rid of it, it can't be reduced. The theory kind of falls apart. And, you know, it says something about that. There is something kind of indisputable about how Marx has created value, You know, this essence of value, which is wrapped up in labor, time, price, use value, the whole thing, that it's fundamentally core and you cannot get rid of it, or you're going to end up with economic systems which cannot replicate that the economic system from their abstractions. This is the only abstraction that works, and we can't jettison it.
Yeah, this chapter proves what I was saying there, is that you can't jettison the micro phenomena and keep the macro phenomena. It's
Correct.
Like, if you observe the macro phenomena, there's not really another set of, consistent tools that will bring you there. Like, there are a bunch of inconsistent stuff. Essentially, that's what it seems like. Like, if what's happening is impossible, if in the models technical change and lowered outputs are impossible, which I gotta imagine there's some really dank bong rip grad school like neoclassical stuff that's like, okay, we have to face facts here, and I don't know. I imagine somebody somewhere, some post Keynesians maybe, like there's really like not, I don't know, like I just can't imagine how you would like recreate the macro phenomenon without this. It's very hard to understand otherwise. Like, and when Marxists did, and this is what this proves, right? When Marxists took this project on, well, first of all, they didn't acknowledge the falling rate of profit. They followed their models and saying that it wasn't true. So they're dealing with really a different problem. But in addition, any attempt to recreate even, the less controversial elements of Marx's value theory was a failure. It couldn't reproduce them. If you're on board with the macro phenomena or a lot of the description of Marx's capital, like, you kind of have to take this stuff seriously as a mechanism. It's not just a critique. I think if Marx was alive today, he would think classical political economy is more clairvoyant into what's happening than the stuff we deal with today in academia. Like, I don't think it's just him, using bourgeois categories, but he doesn't care about them. I think he, made a scientific contribution, and it's a shame if scientific socialists don't appreciate that.
Yeah, so I think we've done. Does anybody else have any words to say on this chapter before we step out? Puya, what did you make of it? Did you like it?
Yeah, I thought it was great. This was my favorite chapter so far. And mostly because I thought Andrew, this 10.7 was very clear. It was made everything so much easier. And yeah, no, I don't really have much to say about it.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Very polite here we are today, until I started effing and blinding now in a minute. Emmanuel, I know you're smoking your pipe and having a thrashing argument in the chat, but do you have any short final few words on this chapter before we wrap up?
Yeah, if I would just conclude, I would reiterate what I said in the beginning, that I think this chapter does a really good job in distinguishing capitalism specifically from surplus or profits specifically, money profits specifically. The thing that we care about in capitalism specifically, from just, building up silos of grain so that we have more if there's a famine, and explaining why, one of those is the former is the type of exploitation that we should care about. It's certainly the type of exploitation that Marx cared about. Whether or not we can produce surpluses of good stuff, surpluses of foodstuffs, or surpluses of computers, or surpluses of commodities, is a very different thing from producing monetary profits. And I think it does a great job of explaining that difference and why the contradiction between physical surpluses and value surpluses is what is fundamental and specific to the capitalist mode of production. You know, why it is that, you know, if we create more stuff and more use values for people, then capitalists aren't going to be happy. Conversely, if there's shortages of things, then people aren't going to be happy, but capitalists are. And that's one of the fundamental points about capitalism. And I think Kleiman does a very articulate job in explaining that difference and why value and use value are two different things.
Well, you know, if Raffa was around in the Incas' time, he would have been a great economist. You know, because they had no money. They used to literally create stores of stuff, and they delivered stuff, and everything was about the production of the commodities, and the value form didn't operate. So, yeah, like, he's an excellent theorist of Aztec or of Inca economics, but not capitalist.
I think even he could be a great economist of Star Trek, you know, Federation economics. How many Intrepid class starships should we produce?
20.
What?
No, 21.
21.
No, wait, 25. Let's go 25.
So yeah, I mean, Sraffian economics is great for planning production and things like that in a very abstract way, if use values are the only thing that we care about. The problem with capitalism is precisely that value is removed from use value. That's the socialist struggle, and it's clear in this chapter what we need to do and why the implications of this whole value use value distinction, why that is one of the most fundamental and most important things in political struggle.
Okay, on that note, I think we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for everybody in the chat. I think there's been
except for that guy. Fuck that guy.
Except for
somebody doing some transphobic stuff. So and complaining
up against the wall with you.
Against the wall, I think that's what Judge Lexi says. Commissar Lexi. Sorry.
Iron Lexi, as I'm known.
You would be you'd only be a district court judge. I'd be Supreme Court judge. Emmanuel would be a parking ticket collector, and Puya would actually be unemployed. I know it's impossible, but he would be unemployed in the economic future. Okay, well,
I'd be the one unemployed person.
Yeah. Next year, unemployable as well. Next year, not just unemployed, but next year we have nearly next year. Chapter 11 next week, we have the empirical defense of the law of value. So we're going to need people to read up on their regression analysis. I haven't done a regression analysis in about 20 years, so I actually need to do a little research. But this chapter I found really, really good. This is our only empirical.
That's cool, Tom. I can use my parking ticket income to give you a few lectures on regression analysis and how it works, because I know all about the correlations between rush hour and parking tickets. So ask me.
Well, this is why you are a parking ticket. It's just it's an efficient allocation of resources under our planned economy. You see. Perfect. So next week.
So Tom, I'm coming from humanities. Does regression analysis have anything to do with regression psychoanalysis?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I think that was a joke. I think that was a joke.
So then,
but it's one of those jokes that only Derek Barron can laugh at.
I'm going to need to brush up on that then.
Yeah.
No, no, but seriously, if you guys want some good stuff on statistics and regression analysis, etc., there is a great series on YouTube, Crash Course Statistics. Takes, you know, it's small 10-minute tidbits.
I got you.
You can basically pass statistics. I don't know how American university course codes work, but I think you could
get graded
do
in Big
statistics
Mac.
101, 102, and even 103 just with those YouTube videos.
Is 103 like first year university?
I have no idea, but
I mean, over.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that is. Yeah, just do a regression. Just look up. I'm sure Khan Academy or somewhere have a like a 10-minute thing on regression. That's probably enough for people to understand.
yeah, that's
crazy.
that's pretty much what this is, except it's a
Yeah.
little bit more, you know, pedagogically nice and whatnot.
Screw pedagogy. Screw pedagogy. Okay, let's. Sorry, yeah.
We will not make you a minister of education. Duly
I'll just
noted.
be
I will
dead.
give you all the parking tickets if you continue with that.
Yeah, what would my job be then? What do you reckon? Like, let's
Well,
have a vote on what my job
Your
is.
chief officer, Tom O'Brien, chief. You know, come on.
Chief Marxist asshole.
Yeah, chief shit talker.
Shit talker.
Transporter engineer, Tom O'Brien.
Yeah, chief just chief overlord. I'll go with that. Okay.
Chief
okay,
Lord of
the dance. Lord of the dance, Tom O'Brien. Right, everybody, good luck and thanks for listening. Will we get a big group goodbye?
Yes. Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.